besides all of the racist and all of that other bullshit that the ACP spills, like one of the fundamental disagreements with it is like, if you understand that for our revolution to be successful here, because you understand what nations exist here, then you understand that our revolution has to not only cross the so-called US border, you realize that our revolution here also has to encompass America's backyard, aka South America. It has to eventually be like a two-continent spanning revolution to find actual success against like the old vestiges of imperialism and colonialism. And that's why that's one like very basic reason, aside from, you know, everything else, but that's one basic reason why you could never do that based on the American identity, where even people in Canada are like, fuck America, right? But people in so-called South America are even more like, fuck America. It's functionally, the stars and bars is functionally a swastika to most of the world. So you could never rally them around that struggle for liberation using stars and bars. You want to encompass a revolution that covers all of this land, then maybe a different kind of flag is necessary. And if you're a revolutionary, might I suggest a red flag, you know? And the thing is, before revolution is won, many revolutionary parties just flew a plain red flag, right? Until they were actually able to gain state power and hammer out something of their own with their own symbology. Like, and the ACP, they love to like cite Cuba or some other examples of countries that preserve their flag, but they have different historical traditions, and those people could rally around that flag. Again, just if you understand the fundamental need of how revolution here will have to play out across borders, then you understand just on that basis alone, the American flag could never win mass support. Now, let's understand on top of that, it's the symbol of genocide that has inspired everyone from the Nazis to Israel, right? And yeah, the way they try and like use Cuba as an example, or China, they'll be like, China's a multinational country, so we should take the example of that. It's like, well, China only works insofar as you understand what nations exist, you see. Like, it's not, like, with China, Tibetan people, all of these other people see themselves as Chinese people, right? That doesn't exist here. That same thing does not exist here. And, like, even within the borders of the United States itself, there's a problem with trying to unite everybody behind that reactionary identity that the flag represents. It's even more of a problem when you factor in the forces you need to not unite with across the so-called Canadian border and across so-called South America as well. Yeah, fuck that. I've been pissing them off, and I had a fun couple days with the ACP. Thank you for the follow. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's the same with Russia, right? Like, Russia was a prison house of nations, but the reason why the Russian identity is able to be preserved is because there is such a thing as the Russian nation, which exists across multiple states. Not the case with the United States. Not the case with Canada. Right? Those are not nations that existed before states. Those nations only exist because of the particular settler colonial genocide state that has been built there. Just like Israel. Exactly the same thing. It's exactly why we would say Israel is a state, it's a genocidal entity, but it's not a nation, and therefore has no right to exist. States have no right to exist, nations have a right to exist. America, not a nation. Canada, not a nation. They were created forcibly through a state, right? A bourgeois state at that. So, yeah, if we want nationalism. We want to get rid of national nihilism. It's true. We don't want national nihilism. But where the national nihilism exists is not rallied around the US flag. The national nihilism exists in the African communities, in the First Nations communities. That's where the national nihilism needs to be defeated. And then those people will, and then we will better realize our common goal, our common enemy, and the need to organize around that common need to abolish settler colonialism. The act of abolishing settler colonial institutions and entities here is the act of destroying so-called US and Canada. This, and then whenever somebody takes that to mean, oh well, we just want to deport everybody. No. No, we want you to join us in revolution. Or are you an opponent of revolution? You decide. And then we'll have, I don't know what'll happen from there. I'm not I'm not going to predict the future, nor could I predict the future. I just know that as revolution builds, we will identify those who are for revolution and those who are against revolution, as is the case with every revolution that has occurred, right? Settlers have taught that nations are all born from mass systematic violence. You were talking about states existing before nationhood is something that is never taught in any settler system, because that would unravel their fake narrative. Exactly. Exactly, Hey Duke. And that's why it's important to understand that nations, where there is nations, right? Nations that we understand as having a right to exist, those nations exist through multiple states. Look at Korea, China, Russia, all of these places, that applies to all of these places. These were nations that went through multiple states. There's a reason why that doesn't happen in the United States and could never happen, because without the capitalist colonial imperialist state, the US nation cannot exist and will not exist. There's no saving the US nation. There is saving all of the nations within the US. But yeah, there's my morning rant. Hi, Noomies. My morning frigging off rant for y'all. I had to have some good breakfast words today. I just had them. I made another post twice in a day, or 2 days in a row. I just did this one. I just said, maybe when ACP members and supporters no longer flood every post about ACP, negative or positive, with racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and ableism edgelord grade jokes, maybe I'll reconsider my position on ACP. I've got them all riled up in the last little while here. But it has been a good opportunity to, of course, expose some funny things. Like this person here was responding to me about this. I just say, ACP responses to my point about their undisciplined edgelord way of interacting is to act like I'm the only one saying this, rather than reflecting a growing sentiment in communist organizations with members who have unfortunate reactions with their members and supporters. And then this person's response right here made me laugh to high heaven. Says, if you have an issue with us engaging in dual power strategies, this is where it gets really funny. Dual power strategies, because we're not appealing to you, you're the ones begging us for attention. Going forward, I expect your critiques to be based on the work we do. Otherwise, let us work for our communities in peace. Now, the funny thing about this is, I just want you to understand that what he just claims here is issue with us engaging in dual power building strategies. Now, let's see. What is the dual power building strategy here? What am I even seeing? I don't understand. Cleaning up, ACP California delivers clothes to homeless on Skid Row in Los Angeles, using it as a photo op. And some of them apparently joined the ULP strike. Very dual power, you see. Sung Monitor did comment and said, "Those are dual power strategies. They're charity. Cleaning a park the state owns isn't the same as building infrastructure for the revolution. Literally, most of my criticism of you asses is how poorly you've pursued your own strategy. Which is either because you're not MLs and are in fact purely fascist, or you're so obsessed with appealing to fascists you buy into liberal conceptions of dual power." And this just made me laugh too. Dual power is when you do community service and have a slur-laden meltdowns on the internet. They don't even know what dual power means, for God's sakes. It's hilarious. They go and clean up a memorial park or fucking hand out some fucking clothes and think they're building dual power. And look, handing out clothes to homeless people, that's good. Okay? That's objectively, it's a good thing and everything. But it ain't dual power. That's not building dual power. What is this? Who sent me this? I found an industrial manufacturing fan cam you may like. Homeless given $1, dual power. I love that. Well, okay, dual power is like a real communist thing, right? But dual power doesn't mean that you're just giving charity. Dual power means that, like, you're actually building up means for your party to pick up the slack that the state is leaving behind. So it doesn't mean that just like you've gathered mutual aid and you're handing out these donations. It means that your party has the funds or the coffers set aside to, like, if there's a lacking of food or something in an area, your party can address that. If there's no medical care in an area, your party could build a hospital in that area. That's dual power, or a medical center, you know, like actual infrastructure that is linked to a communist party. It doesn't mean making fucking pickles and giving that out at a barbecue. It doesn't mean going and even handing out clothes to homeless people, which is a good thing. Like I say, it's a good thing. But what actual dual power would be is if you had like a warehouse that was owned by the Communist Party and that was distributing clothes to homeless people. Now you're talking dual power, or at least a lot closer to dual power than whatever the fuck that was. That's just capitalist charity. Church groups do the same thing. And again, it's not bad that they do that, but it's no different than when a church group gives charity to somebody. That's all it is. That's a good thing. People need it. I'm glad it's there, and it can reach people who need it. It ain't dual power, though. It ain't dual power. Dual power means that the organization that is serving the people is under the direct command of the Communist Party, is part of the Communist Party infrastructure. We're so far away from any party really building dual power yet, it's hilarious. And again, one of the other critiques I really have of them is they show how impatient they are. You know? Like, I did know, I came to me this morning as well. Yeah, right here. It's like they show a certain level of like impatience and vibes, in the sense that they essentially act like, oh, it's entirely the fault of communist organizations themselves that we don't have like mass position yet. But again, that leaves out the fact that, you know, we are in a particular material stage of history where the masses are severely confused and disorganized by the attacks of the bourgeoisie, by their ideological apparatus, and by the existence of super profits that the bourgeoisie uses to bribe the labor here in the West, and essentially make a extremely bloated labor aristocracy. This is something that Dave actually and I have both been talking about, I think, quite a bit recently, which is the idea that, like, for revolution to win here, you need the Imperials to win, or to lose a major war. You need the resistance to deal a major blow to the imperialists. You need them to lose a major war, and you need them to have some serious super profit sources in their third world dry up. And through that mechanism, you will see people here all of a sudden go from being spontaneously focused organization to looking for actual concrete organizations with the scientific way forward. Right? We understand, like, yes, there's much to be said about the strategies of CPUSA or PSO lacking, right? I'm not saying that. But to say that it's all entirely the fault of the left that they haven't built a mass movement ignores the role that the bourgeoisie can have on influencing public opinion and ideology, and in the power of those super profits to get people into a position of class collaborationism, right? I think it ignores those two fundamental things. And that the duty of revolutionaries here is to understand those things and organize as best as we can with those who are class conscious and conscious of imperialism here, and organize for the inevitable situation where super profits, due to liberation movements gaining ground in the global south, and as that happens, we have to prepare ourselves as much as possible for the reaction of that, which is going to be, of course, to recover those super profits here at home, which is when that colonial violence turns inward more and more vehemently, right? More and more aggressively. What we call, what whites term fascism, right? That colonial violence turn inwards, the lack of super profits and the need to recover the profit level of the bourgeoisie will compel that sort of violence at home. And then that, of course, will have the reaction of labor needing to react to that. Now, it can react in a couple different ways, as we know. One of that could be sweeping more people up into revolutionary organizations. The other thing is for them to be radicalized towards a fascist reactionary program. And it's the duty of revolutionaries to try and sweep them up into revolutionary programs. And we sure as fucking can do that by tailing the most reactionary elements of the MAGA movement. Alright. I'm sure a half an hour rant is enough. An example of big potential for dual power in the US might be addressing food deserts by setting up food stands with healthy produce. Obviously takes some resources, but it's a material need to address. And medical care, GMO, I would say, in the US as well, you know? Canada too, for that matter, medical care. Canada could really benefit from a communist party that was able to direct some medical services that were free, just like the state is, but is under the direction of the Communist Party instead. But yeah. Another way America may find its way to revolution is if capitalism continues on as it is. The population will suffer more and more and more under capitalism. It gets to that point before local ecological collapse via capitalism. Hopefully people there will revolt. Yeah, Robo. And what I think too is I think that will be extremely accelerated. Like, I think by all rights we should be there already. But the benefits of the super profits of imperialism give them the ability to make up for that. So while it might seem like it's an impossible thing to overcome here, one successful revolution in Africa could turn that around completely and make it so all of a sudden the bourgeoisie don't have the means to bribe the masses and have to do things violently and no longer with kid gloves and with bribes, right? That could happen very rapidly, just as the result of, like, a single African fucking liberation finding success. Or an Iranian conflict where they have to close straits and access ports for trading, right? Any one of those things could very rapidly lead to that situation because the West very much relies on those super profits to have this standard of living. The minute those are gone, that will deteriorate instantly, rapidly. And that will be, like, the most violence is trying to roll that back, trying to roll back those living standards and get them back to a point where capitalists are making the profits that they want. Yeah. Also, every one of those scenarios, including environmental, precipitates war of some kind. Yep, it's true. And it's something that it could be. We could get data in the future, and it's proven that okay, perhaps it is the internal contradictions of capitalism now that can do it. But what we can say is, so far, right? So far, in reality, that hasn't been the case. But I do think that the loss of super profits and the turning of colonial violence inwards does constitute, of course, an acceleration or a rising aggression of class war. Right? Class war is always going on, but that would be a more open, bare naked, violent kind of class war. That would make the class war itself more obvious to people, you know? There's a really good quote from Che I want you to read right here. Or that I want to read you. And then we'll go on to happy fun time. But it was not capitalism's internal contradictions that, having exhausted all possibilities, caused the system to explode. The struggle for liberation from a foreign oppressor. Now, keep in mind, Robo, though, that applies to us, right? That applies to us First Nations people fighting against the so-called Canadian state or the so-called US state. That is a foreign oppressor. The misery caused by external events such as war, whose consequences privileged classes place on the backs of the exploited. Liberation movements aimed at overthrowing neo-colonial regimes. These are the usual factors on unleashing this kind of explosion. Conscious action does the rest. And I think that's why here, our key to building revolution here is what Gerald Horne pointed out before, is the focus on settler colonialism. The focus on independence and achieving abolition of settler colonialism. And that will, of course, encourage the Canadian and the American bourgeoisie to turn against that, or at least to accelerate its aggression against that. Because I did see like some things that I found disappointed in some First Nations communities was the idea that they were going to pick up guns and fight to protect Canadian sovereignty. And it was very frustrating, very, very frustrating to me, because to me it was like in the event, like that's not even going to happen because we're so much integrated as the 51st state of America anyway. But if it were, let's play the mind game where if armed American invasion were to happen, I'm of the opinion that it would be in the interest of First Nations to actually not fight for Canadian sovereignty, not fight on behalf of our Canadian bourgeoisie who are oppressing and genociding us, but to fight for their defeat and to encourage our comrades in USA to fight for the defeat of their bourgeoisie as well. And that through the defeat and even through exhaustion of certain forces of both the Canadian and the USA fighting forces would empower liberation struggles here in a way that preserving Canadian sovereignty does not. But that's a whole nother discussion that perhaps we will get into next week about compradors and the people who love them. How many wars can the U.S. stand to fight at once? And that right there, I think you're hitting something right there, Dave. Right? How many wars can the U.S. afford to fight at once? And stand to fight, have the manpower to fight, have the equipment to fight? Can it fight against liberation struggles in Africa, South America, Asia, fucking Eastern Europe, Canada, in its own borders, all at the same time? I don't think it can. I don't think it can. And I think that, and that's the kind of unity we're talking about. That doesn't negate the fact that we're engaged in national liberation struggles, but that national liberation struggle should be linked to international solidarity and international struggle. DPRK's was, China's was, Cuba's was. They didn't fight the revolutions in isolation while they are the masters of the revolution. But, you know, right? And unfortunately for them, it takes more than money to win a war. And something that is being proven with the situation in Gaza and with the situation against Iran, right? Like just that alone proves that the superior weaponry of Israel, the superior weaponry of fucking America means nothing. It's what does it mean? Even the air superiority, like there, you can comment about how it was unable to defend itself, but many of those bombs hit decoys, and Iran is using a missile program in a way that shows, well, maybe that air superiority wasn't as important as everybody was thinking. You know, it's modern warfare. Even now, like it's got unanswered questions, that lessons that are being taught even just now with this with the Iran-Israel conflict, lessons that imperialists went, huh, we didn't consider this, I bet, right? So yeah, that's my morning Leaping Larry talk. The morning Leaping Larry monologue. America got beat in Vietnam. It got beat in Korea, right? Korean people had just thrown off Japanese oppressors and then did the same thing for fucking US imperialists who tried to come in. So, we will win. Their technology, all of that, it means nothing. And that's why those who think that we need to build our revolution by rallying around the flag, I think they're showing their weakness.